talk about a lot of things here. Okay, so let's start with an easiest one, but also we'll start with the bad news and then go on to something that might actually result in good news for you, for anybody who is watching us. So the bad news is that even though Biden promised that there will be some protections for the Russian draft dodgers, at this point it's just that, it's just words. There has been no program in place, no change in policy. Everything remains as it was, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. But if today is October 21st of 2022, okay, if you guys are watching this past October 21st or way past October 21st, check my words. Okay, maybe that program is already in place, but at this point there is nothing. So as far as getting asylum in the United States, okay, don't forget that the first step is to get out of Russia. You cannot really apply for asylum without either being in the United States. Let's say you come here as a visitor and then you apply for asylum, or getting to something called the port of entry, which means a border crossing.
Yakov, I just want to clarify something real quick. So you're saying there's no special program for Russian draft dodgers, however, they can apply under a general umbrella of getting a political asylum in the United States? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So they can apply just like anybody else. Anybody can really apply for asylum. The question is, do you really have a strong asylum claim?
I see.
If you are a dentist from Sweden, you might not necessarily have a strong asylum claim. But if you're a Russian draft dodger, it just feels like, this is something that we should be protecting people from. Basically people are going to be drafted against their will into a war, an unjust war, where they likely will die. So it just sounds like it sounds like this is something that's asylum worthy. But here's a snag, and this is going to be super important. So I suggest that anybody who is watching us right now, pay attention. Just because you're awaiting the draft does not necessarily mean that the government here is going to give you asylum. And the reason for that is that governments tend to respect each other's laws. Okay, so if there was a law passed by a Russian government saying that, okay, we're going to draft you, you're evading the draft. So now, if you go back, they'll put you in prison simply because you're evading the draft, you're breaking the law. So the knee-jerk reaction by the U.S. government is going to be like, well, we will respect another nation's laws. Just because you are breaking that law does not necessarily make you eligible for asylum.
But I think Russia is a little different, because right now Russia is enemy number one of the United States. So perhaps that could help in consideration for asylum, no?
Well, so all these things that we talked about, Michael, right? About the unjust war, about the fact that you are not going to be trained very well. You might not even been drafted into the army lawfully. Maybe you weren't even eligible to be drafted. All those things that we kind of understand right away, and most people understand right away, they have to be spelled out when you file for your asylum.
I see.
They have to be, the government really would have to understand that this is not just a regular draft dodging situation. Okay, and so most people who are evading the draft in Russia, they usually also have they have some political views that basically led them to that choice. Of course you might be you might be afraid to go into the army and die, but and that's obviously that's a super reasonable way to look at this. But most of the people that are going to be watching this video, they're probably going to be against the war in Ukraine. They're probably going to be against the the murderous Russian government policy.
Okay.
So if you if you are already here and you're applying for asylum, it's super important not just to say, hey, you know what, I'm awaiting the draft. Because if you just say that without thinking, the government might, without thinking, deny you just because the general policy is that you respect another nation's laws.
So it has to be coupled with. So you think it has to be coupled with your political opinion that you are really a dissident, if you will, against Russian politics or Russian policy.
Bring your political opinion into it. It seems like it's kind of silly. Everybody understands what's going on, but yet when you're dealing with a government bureaucracy, it's important to do this right. And when you're applying for asylum, it's one of the harder things to get from another government.
So you really have to build your case. You have to really spell it out for the bureaucrats in America who are considering your claim, to really show your case. And let me ask you this. You talked about eligibility for a draft according to Russians, because originally they announced it's only for men who had prior military experience, nobody too old. We're only looking for 300,000 people, only 300,000 people. But then it turned out sometimes they snatch people off the street who are over 50 years old. I've even heard reports of people who are handicapped given draft notices, people who are in college who are not supposed to be drafted, people with no prior military experience. So then, does that really open up a wider pool of possible applicants for an asylum? You don't have to be just a young man with prior military experience. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Just if I mentioned a dentist from Sweden, kind of everybody kind of understands that if you're from Sweden, Switzerland, or any European Union country, you probably will not get asylum in the United States because your rights are protected. You have redress. You can go to courts. The courts are independent. Asylum from Switzerland sounds like a joke,
right?
And it's true. Most of the time it is. Now, if you're from North Korea, for example, I don't even need to know your story to suspect that most likely you might be persecuted in North Korea.
By default, you basically apply for an asylum.
Well, right. I mean, unfortunately, by default, nothing happens with U.S. immigration law. Sure. But if it's done right, if you're from North Korea, most likely you will get asylum in the United States.
Understood.
Now, other countries are probably somewhere in between those two extremes, between Switzerland and North Korea. And unfortunately, Russia is quickly approaching towards the North Korea end of the spectrum.
Jacob, now let's talk about the practical considerations. Let's say you are a Russian man. You're right now located in Moscow, and you want to apply for consideration for an asylum in America. Where should you go? Who do you turn to? I actually had these questions. I had people write to me on Facebook from Russia asking me, begging me for explanation. I cannot give it. I'm an attorney. You are an immigration attorney. Thank you again for your time for doing this seminar for people like this. What could such a person do?
The first step is get out of Russia. Okay, you're not going to be able to apply for asylum in Russia. The consulates are, the U.S. consulate hasn't been operational for more than a year at this point.
I see.
So you save your life, get out of Russia. That's step number one.
Okay.
There are refugee programs when people can apply for the refugee status outside of the United States.
Mhm.
But Russian citizens are not yet entitled to any of those programs. So
So
the
they
only
have to-
way,
Yeah, you have to apply physically in United States of America. Is that what you're
Right.
saying? You can't
yeah,
go
get out of
to.
Russia.
Mhm.
If you have a visa to come to the United States, a visitor visa, any other visa that would allow you to travel here, travel here, okay? Because the only way to apply for asylum is
Mhm.
within the United States or at the border. So if you don't have a visa, then it becomes a little trickier. As you might know, there are a lot of people who try to enter the United States through the southern border. So if you do have a visa to that would allow you to enter the United States, a visitor visa, come to the United States, apply for asylum within the United States. Your other option, if you don't have a visa, is to apply at the border.
Okay.
And that becomes a little trickier.
Mhm.
As you know, a lot of people try to enter the United States through the southern border.
Okay.
You don't need to try and basically surreptitiously cross the border to enter the United States. All you need to
Mhm.
do is reach a United States border officer.
Okay.
Now that could be harder than you think,
Right.
because when you are leaving Mexico,
Mhm.
you are going to pass through the Mexican exit control. You're
Okay.
going to see Mexican border officers first, who will check your papers, and if they don't see a visa or any other the way for you to enter the United States, they'll probably turn you away. There
Oh,
are
wow. So how do you reach an American customs agent or immigration agent?
so
Or an officer.
Ukrainian citizens they were able to actually reach the U.S. border officers through the southern border
Mhm.
because there were nothing. I don't think there was anything in writing per se, but some Mexican border officers would allow
see.
Ukrainian asylum seekers or
Mhm.
refugees to reach the United States border officers.
Mhm.
Now, Russian citizens, sometimes they would get in, sometimes not. Since this had occurred,
Right.
the Ukrainian citizens are going through another process. But the Russian citizens are still oftentimes trying to reach the United States border officers through the border.
I see.
Now, whether you're going to be able to reach the United States border officers, go through the Mexican border people, really depends on when you are going to be trying to come in, because that policy changes quite a lot. Sometimes people report success trying to come in at, let's say, Tijuana, San Diego border crossing the
Okay.
Otay Mesa. Sometimes they have more success trying to come in through a Texan border crossing. Sometimes people report success trying to enter in a car because
Yeah, I actually heard that. Let's talk about that, because I actually heard reports that if you go through a car, it is easier because of some kind of a vagueness in the law regarding crossing. If it's by foot, it's one thing, by car the other. Is there any truth to that?
And now take everything that I say right now, take it with a grain of salt. I haven't done that crossing myself. I haven't tried to seek asylum at the border. This is just something that my colleagues might tell me,
Right.
my clients might tell me. But if you're trying to enter in a car, okay, then you kind of go through a separate line. And the reason is because, as you know, if you're trying to enter any border in a car, you might see a big plaza, kind of if you're going through to enter the New Jersey Turnpike. You might see a big plaza with toll booths, but instead of people who are collecting your money, they're border officers looking at your papers.
I see.
And first you will encounter the Mexican border officers. So if you're entering in the car, oftentimes the Mexican border officers, especially when there's tens of thousands of cars going through that particular crossing, like the Otay Mesa, they might just check the papers of the driver. And let's say it's one of your friends who is a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. And then they would wave you through. Then you might reach the U.S. border officers. And at that point, apply for asylum.
So
Now, once
it's
again,
best to have a driver who has an American driver's license or passport or something.
I heard that people do encounter some success doing that. Okay, it's quasi legal. Okay, so in no way would I ever recommend breaking the law.
Of course,
but when
that's
you're
here, we're not here for that. We're just here to give examples of what's out there.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you this: if you're seeking asylum, okay, that's exactly why you are not necessarily arrested for crossing the border illegally. The government understands that you will, people do a lot of things when their lives are in danger. Okay,
Right.
And trying to enter safety, even if it means that you might be trying to approach a border officer without a visa, is not exactly too high on the list of crimes.
Right.
So it's something that whether you would plan to try this or to recommend anyone to try this, you have to understand that this is not 100% safe. This is not 100%. It may not even be 100% legal. But if you are trying to save your life or the life of your loved ones, you know what? It's probably going to be okay.
Okay. Now let's say you had some luck actually crossing the border legally, illegally. You encounter a U.S. agent, you present yourself and ask nicely, politely for an assignment based on the fact that you're a Russian draft dodger. What happens next? Are you then detained right away? Is that what happens?
Yes, you might be detained. For how long you will be detained really depends on your particular situation, or even the border officer who is looking at your particular situation. Okay. Let me give you an example. If, let's say, your name matches a name of somebody on their most wanted list, okay, you might be detained for a little longer while they make sure that you're not that person. If you have any sort of a potential criminal record, okay, they might not release you at all, and then you would need to get
in America. Criminal record in America,
and you were in the world. But they might not release you. What might have to happen is that you would have to get someone like me to ask an immigration judge for a bond, and then maybe if it's not something major, a judge would release you after you or your relatives pay a bond for you, which will be returned to you after the completion of your court proceedings. And now we're coming to the court proceedings.
And let me just clarify, if they release you on the bond, are you then placed on an ankle monitor and you guys stay in the house arrest, or you're free to move around until you're free
to move around within the United States?
Okay, very good. And how long does it take to actually obtain the hearing if you qualify for an asylum?
It's usually scheduled relatively quickly, within days or maybe a week or two. In most cases, unless there is really a lot of people going through that border and seeking asylum. Now, right now, once again, as of October 21st, 2022, the policy of the U.S. government when it comes to the borders is that not many people get detained if they could really demonstrate that there is a reasonable fear of them going back. If they have friends or relatives who they might be able to go to.
It's important to line up. It's important to line up ahead of time. Friends, relatives who can vouch for you and say they'll provide for you assistance, lodging, food, and so on. Correct?
That will be helpful. Not necessarily required, but definitely helpful. One thing to consider is. Look, if you are going to be going that route, make sure that you don't have an arrest record. Make sure that you do not look suspicious to the U.S. border officers. And that's it sounds like really silly advice, so I will have to compliment that a little bit. What that means is that, as I said, they're looking for a particular type of person, right? So obviously, if you have a criminal record, maybe that's not the right route for you. You'll just spend time in detention, right? If let's say your name happens to be Osama bin Laden. You might expect to spend more time while they make sure that it's just a namesake and you're not an actual Osama bin Laden, right? If you are coming in with your girlfriend, but you're not actually married,
Okay.
and let's say 2 or 3 of her other friends, the government might suspect that maybe you're bringing in people for human trafficking reasons.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting.
So what that means is that, once again, you might be detained for a little longer while the government sends someone to have an interview with you and to investigate your situation a little closer.
I see.
So,
And Yakov, let me ask a question. Let's say they decide, the government, you don't qualify. How long does it take this hearing until you get the hearing to know that you don't qualify? In other words, how long would you spend in detention? Let's say you have a criminal record, you're coming in with 5 girls, you fall under suspicion, you don't get qualified. How long you expect to stay in detention?
it really depends on you, strangely enough, in that particular case.
Okay.
Well, of course, if you do have a criminal record and there is a warrant for your arrest, a red warrant, when the U.S. government has the right to arrest you and hold you, and then maybe port you to the country that actually issued that particular warrant, you're not getting out. But in most other cases, don't forget that you're in immigration detention. If you tell the government that, hey, you know what, I changed my mind, I am not seeking asylum, okay, then the government will make arrangements for you to leave. Okay,
I see.
So whether it takes hours or a few days or a couple of weeks, once again, really depends on your particular situation, where you end up, etc., etc., etc. If you try to stay and the judge, let's say, denies you bond, but you want to exhaust all the possibilities, that might allow you to stay in the United States, then you could expect to stay to remain in detention for months until potentially the government hears your case and maybe even hears the appeal.
You know what I hear here is that because there's no special program for Russian draft dodgers, it looks like a very murky process. If you go at it alone, you facing a faceless US bureaucrat and faceless US immigration system, you may get lost. And the outcome may not be what you desire. You may be sent back without any luck. Of course, if you get an attorney, there's never a guarantee, right? Yakov, there's never a guarantee of a success, but at least somebody's holding your hand who knows the process, who can guide you, because there's so many moves here you could make that could be wrong. Step left, and you could be out of line. So you have to really coordinate everything, think everything through. So I suggest, Yakov, that if somebody is trying to escape Russia, already escaped, and is serious about coming to US on asylum grounds, contact an attorney, an immigration attorney like yourself, so that you can get at least a consultation. And then if you like the attorney, you want to go forward, retain an attorney who can be with you every step of the way. It's very important to have somebody, an advocate, somebody who actually is your agent, is your protector, if you will, who advocate, fight for you, for your rights, and who actually feels your pain, because this is not a pleasant experience. So you definitely want somebody with sympathy and experience.
Well,
did I sum it up? Did I sum it up correctly, Yakov?
Absolutely. If if the stakes are high and you are entering an unfamiliar territory, literally and metaphorically in this case.
And by the way, as we said, yes, and Yakov, we had a whole session before. There are a lot of fraudsters out there that prey on people like that, take money from them, say they are cheaper than attorneys, guarantee results, and then people get stuck. And listening to bad advice is not a defense, it's not an excuse. So don't do that. Don't go that route. If you decide to take somebody, take an attorney. Yakov, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. We couldn't cover everything at once. There's a lot of information. So please watch this video, watch our prior videos. And Yakov is here to help. If you have any questions for you or your loved ones, by the way, a lot of people who approached me here, they have loved ones in Russia. They're asking for their friends and relatives. So if you're one of those persons and you care about your friends, you want them to help them out, to escape a dangerous situation that they had no part in, did not want to be in, then contact Yakov Spektor for a consultation and then take it from there. Yakov, thank you so much for your time. We'll see you again.
Thank you, Michael. Always
I
a
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thank you. Take care.